Ogilvie.
There are two unexpected events that led me on my path here today. One was meeting a Jesuit priest born missing his right forearm. And the second was the acceptance into the Presidential Leadership Scholar Program. I'm the youngest of four in a Marine Corps family, which means I got my butt kicked a lot. Growing up, I played soccer, and at the age 17, started getting recruitment letters, one specifically from the United States Naval Academy. Now, my sister was recruited to play basketball there, and my dad's a Hall of Fame All-American lacrosse goalie, aka a legend. So quite a stir, and so I sat down and looked at my father and I said, "Dad, this is not my calling." And he simply looked at me with a smile and confidence and said, "Megan, you're gonna find your way to serve." And that's been my mission every day since. I graduated from the University of Richmond as a Division I athlete and played professional soccer in Iceland. I came home and decided to hang up my cleats and my jersey and head to New York City with a blazer, ready to take on the financial world. Over the next 6 years, I went through Lehman, that didn't really work out very well, but Barclays, Macquarie, and although my professional success was kind of getting to a good point, I struggled to find purpose. I really struggled to understand how was I actually finding my way to serve. And it wasn't until my best friend Kate called me. I happened to be a bridesmaid at her wedding, and she said, "Hey, I have to introduce you to someone." "Great." She said, "His name is Father Curry. He's a Jesuit priest." Now, my track record in dating wasn't great, but I don't think it was that bad, right? We're not at priest level right now, right? But when I met him at the rehearsal dinner, he told me of his life's work. Born missing his right forearm, he dedicated his life to service, to working with people of different abilities and the empowerment of that. After being at Walter Reed for so many years, he recognized our men and women coming home to new physical, emotional, cognitive realities deserved a quality opportunity to find purpose again. By the end of that weekend, I convinced him to hire me, and within 6 months, I'd left New York and moved down to Washington, D.C. to start Dog Tag. After meeting our fierce co-founder, Connie Milstein, and in June of 2014, we launched Dog Tag's Fellowship, a 5-month fellowship where we foster the entrepreneurial mindset and small business initiative to service members with service-connected disabilities, military spouses, and military caregivers. Throughout the 5 months, they earn and graduate with a certificate in business administration from Georgetown University. They use our bakery, our beautiful bakery model, as an opportunity to understand the entrepreneurial mindset and the small business initiatives. And our whole wraparound services is truly about wellness. Health is wealth, especially as we're transitioning. During that time, our fellowship was able to obviously operate right here in this bakery. Hopefully you all had some delicious treats at lunch. They're made with sugar and butter and love and joy. So don't worry, by eating them, there's so many endorphins, all the calories are gone. We were able to launch our first cohort, like I said, in 2014. In January of this year, we launched our 15th. In 2017, I had a phenomenal opportunity to be accepted into the Presidential Leadership Scholar Program, an initiative that the Bush Institute supports greatly. There's 3 key leadership lessons I learned during that time. 1, I was not owning my leadership. Day 1 of the fellowship, of sitting down next to another scholar, I said, "Man, I shouldn't be here. I don't know how I got in." And that scholar literally looked at me and said, "Really? I know I should be here." Fascinating. He didn't say that with arrogance, but he said with confidence. I had lost Father Curry in December of 2015, and I had struggled to step into his shoes. I realized I had to make my own and step forward in my own leadership. The second thing I learned, I was so busy building a fence to protect my team from the stress and anxiety of running an organization. While here at the Bush Institute, Keith Hennessy spoke about the financial crisis. And what he said is that President Bush looked at him and said, "Keith, go back, bring me the best solution, and let me deal with the politics." How brilliant is that? I recognized instead of building a fence, I needed to open the gate. And I needed to allow my team members to be part of the solutions. The third thing I learned is complex problems require complex solutions. I came to PLS, and my plan was, I'm going to expand Dog Tag. Now, naively, I thought it was my fault that I didn't know what it looked like or felt like, but the recognition is it's complex. And as I went through the PLS program and I heard everyone from the White House team members to the chief of staff, and as we've heard today, complex problems require decision-making and complex solutions. I had to become a student of my organization, recognize what we did well, do that, and then focus on how we could replicate it before I did anything else. Upon graduating from PLS, I moved forward as a leader that Dog Tag demanded me to be and needed me to be. I opened the gates and brought my team in to build our strategic plan for growth. We doubled down on our methodology of our fellowship. We invested in our impact survey, and we built a strategic plan that was not just financially viable, but sustainable. In 2020, we were ready to launch. We had picked a city, we're going to expand to Chicago, and COVID hit. Now our plan for thriving became surviving. But, like the Marine child I am, adapt and overcome. Our program went from in-person to virtual. We continue to run our program recognizing our fellows needed a place to be every day. They needed that purpose, and they needed that capability to show up and know that in the world of uncertainty, that they were certain that they could continue to grow here at DogTag. We recognize that was also part of our model for growth, and that we can go into a new market and test our fellowship without having to actually invest in infrastructure. I stand here today to say for my PLP project, we've officially expanded to Chicago as of January of this year. We've launched our first fellowship program, and we'll be graduating in the next 4 weeks. I'm exceptionally proud to be the CEO of DogTag, serving over 205 fellows in our program. Our fellows come to the fellowship to redefine success for themselves, to refine purpose, to find their voice and learn how to tell their story. Like Moja Sola, an Army veteran, 100% disabled, came into our program recognizing that health was her key focus. Voraciously taking advantage of everything our program provided, she graduated, started her own company called She Wins, and became an advocate so much that she lobbied. And now in Washington, D.C. on October 18th is D.C. Women's Veterans Day. Gabriella Bell, a former military spouse, mother of 4, recognizing she had to redefine what success meant for her. Taking from the lessons of being a teacher, she actually became a virtual assistant to multiple entrepreneurs. Upon graduating, she launched Organized Q. Today, she has over 35 staff members. 50% of them are military spouses, and she's finding her way to serve. Now, PLS gave me a phenomenal opportunity, and Father Curry changed my life. I am here today to say, with complete gratitude, thank you. I have been able to find my purpose. And right now, I also have one of the most phenomenal opportunities of my life. As I mentioned, I am a child of a Marine. And when I talk about Marines, I mean like deactivated landmine as a clock Marine on the wall. Like paintings, nah, swords. And just in case no one knew, license plate. Everyone in Springfield, Virginia knew who we were. So with that, I am honored on behalf of my Marine Corps family and all the Marine Corps families out there to introduce our keynote speaker, General James Mattis and Ken Hersh.
Thanks, young lady. Appreciate it.
Well, we have to follow that.
Tough.
So, first of all, thank you for being here and making the time. I'm humbled to lead this conversation, and my goal is to get off of your Wikipedia page and find out a little bit about what makes you tick. You have had such an extensive career, 43 years in the Marines, starting commissioned ROTC on a college campus all the way to a 4-star general and then ultimately the Secretary of Defense in this country. You're a true hero, and I'd like to start talking about personal, your views on leadership, and then we'll move into the country and the world. So you weren't destined for the Marine Corps. You had a little run-in with the law when you were young that changed your life. So why don't we start with your personal story and how you ended up a Marine?
Well, yeah, I run in with the law, and in that regard, thank you for having me back, President, First Lady. I would just tell you that I don't get invited to speak in front of polite company much anymore. So this is an honor to be back here with all of you. But yeah, I was 18 years old. I had a few rough edges, spent some time in jail, but I would probably never have joined the military had it not been for the draft. And I was going to get drafted. It was 1969. Some of you know your history. You know why we were drafting in those days. And bottom line was I wasn't the smartest draft dodger. I joined the Marine Infantry to get out of the Army.
So that goes perfectly to your call sign, which was chaos. I thought Mad Dog was your real nickname. Walk us through how you got branded in the Marines.
Yeah, Mad Dog came from the news media on a slow news day, I think. Even my troops made fun of that one. They all knew my call sign was Chaos. I didn't want to ever be signing letters to next of kin. Basically, we had a general whose nickname was Mad Dog. The families had paid a heck of a price, and I didn't want them thinking there's some guy up there with no brain, sending their sons into the fight. But my real call sign was Chaos. It comes from when I was a colonel out in the Mojave Desert. Had about 7,500 sailors and Marines out there. And every couple hours, I was commanding this unit, and I'd run down to see my operations officer, and I'd say, I got another great idea. And he was from Brooklyn. You know how they talk funny up there. And he'd listen to me and say, thank you, and he'd take notes. And I came back one day, and I gave him another great idea. As I was walking out on the whiteboard, was Chaos written up on a whiteboard. I said, what's that about? And he said, oh, don't worry about that. You don't need to know that. And so I said, well, yes, I do. And so I waterboarded him, got it out of him. And it turns out my irreverent troops had decided that Chaos was my nickname when I came down there because its colonel has another outstanding suggestion. And they didn't consider all my suggestions quite as brilliant as I did. So I adopted it, though, for a reason, and that was to remind myself that maybe I need a little more humility here. Maybe I'm not the brightest guy in the block. Well,
one of your signature, I'll call it approaches, when you, as reading your book, when you were assumed a new command, the first thing you did was read. Talk to us about your approach to reading and history, because you're really one of the great historians in this country who's come through the military, and I think it's so important for people to appreciate how that transpired, how that transformed your leadership.
Well, it did. Now, when you join the Marine Corps, everybody, privates and second lieutenants, you got about 6 books you have to read. You get promoted to corporal sergeant, you get another 6. You make captain, another 6. You make general, you get another 20. And so you're kind of brought up on biography. We assume that life is just too short as a leader to learn everything you need to know from your own experience. And other people have been there before, so you read a lot of history, and a lot of it's biography. And it shapes the way you go into jobs because you know how other people successfully or unsuccessfully dealt with similar situations. And that's critical because what you're trying to do when you're a leader is you're trying to define reality. That's your first responsibility. Then you're trying to compose teams to solve those problems that you've defined. And history books are full of good lessons. I get a lot of good new ideas from old books.
Now, you talk about in the spring of '02, before Iraqi freedom, you took command of the 1st Marine Division. What did you read to get you ready as you thought about that region of the world?
I read about Alexander the Great because we were going to be operating over the same terrain he was. I read something from the Greeks, from something called the March Up by Xenophon. I read about a British Army division that got trapped and destroyed in Iraq in World War I. And then we did a lot of reading of articles from National Geographic, things like that.
And did that inform your battle plans?
Oh, very much, very much.
And did you find that that actually, when you were basically traversing the same terrain that was in the books, that it was all familiar?
You do get a sense of deja vu all over again, but you have to adapt it, obviously, to your current circumstance. But I think what it really did, it allows you to see what you're doing inside a context and you avoid this sense of everything is new. It wasn't all new. I think except for some of the ways we propelled ourselves across the desert, Alexander the Great would have looked around and said, yeah, it looks pretty familiar to me in a lot of ways. But the point here is that you're not going into anything new if you studied history. The new stuff, as President Truman once put it, is only the history you don't know. And so it wasn't really a way to know exactly what's going to happen next, but the context you were in gave you a certain stability. And you want to, as a leader, you always want to exude calm. You know, calm is contagious. If that's the way you are taking the crises in stride, and that reading really helps you.
So, speaking of your leadership style, you've said that you're hard on issues but not on spirits. And I was struck by how intentional you were to connect with your troops throughout your career. How did you approach that?
Well, we were talking at lunch today about being hard on issues, not on your troops. None of them are staying awake at night trying to figure out how to mess up your day the next day. They're trying their best. So the way you do this, you know, when you take people into a problem like that, you define the reality, and then you make sure that you clarify and confirm with them they know what you want to do. And I'd almost put it like writing music. If you were Mozart, you were writing music for this play, this orchestra piece called The Invasion of Country X, you'd be real specific in the first bar. There'd be a couple very clear notes, 2 or 3 sentences when you write this out. Just, my aim is to do the following. And then in the last bar, the last stanza, there'd be some real specific notes. At the end of this, here's where I want to be. And in the middle, you'd only put in about 1/3 of the notes of Mozart. And what you're doing is you're leaving for initiative and aggressiveness of your subordinates to fill in all the gaps you left. You make it very clear what you intend to do, very clear where you want to end up, and very vague, you know, just enough to guide them on the middle. Then you take your hands off the steering wheel and make sure you have good feedback loops, and that's the way you go.
Now, you've talked about that. You said it's like unleashing audacity. Create the why and let them figure out the how.
Right.
And did that always work?
Yes, it always works. I mean, trust me, I didn't make 4-star general just because I fought dumb enemy generals. That was part of it. That's a sure way to get there. But no, the troops got me out of every jam I got them into, because that aim is not going to be easy. You're going to throw your young guys against some enemy that are determined not to let you do what you want to do. So their initiative and aggressiveness, as long as you reward that in your organization, you get the behavior you reward. And every time you got into a real jam, there was some young guy down there who said, I got an idea. I know where we want to end up at the end of the day, and here's what I'm going to do. He saw the opportunity and he did it. Now you have to have feedback loops, and you're still responsible. But what you want to do is unleash that initiative.
It is amazing. In your book, you talked about doctrine as the last refuge of the unimaginative, and that the Marines taught you that. And so the question is, as a leader, how do you balance the need for consistency and clarity with without squashing the initiative as you go down the organization?
Yeah, you have to be really careful there, because most of the time your doctrine is written as lessons learned the hard way. And so you have to know the doctrine, and you train for brilliance in the basics. But if you hire and recruit for character, they will have the opportunity, and they will seize the opportunity to depart from the doctrine because it doesn't match that moment in time. Otherwise, you get some pathetic performance like the Russians, who are out there blundering around right now, getting their own troops killed, and generals trying to go down and be squad leaders, that sort of thing, because nobody has any initiative. So you just have to make sure that they are trained well enough in the doctrine, in their tactics, that they know when to depart from what the book says right at that point in time.
Okay, and we'll get to the current situation, but you were very careful to honor codes of ethics and doing things the right way. You gave orders to your men to, if you saw innocents that might get hurt, don't take the shot. And again, that method of fighting, when your opponent may not follow that same route, could be difficult. But you did say, as a Marine, be polite and be professional, but have a plan to kill everyone you meet. Was that true in the battlefield and Washington, or just in the battlefield?
Yeah, you have to be careful where you employ those statements. What I always tried to do, I'd go back through antiquity and I'd try to get a statement that would allow me, a 50-some-year-old general, to go all the way down to my 18-year-old sailors and Marines and hit them in the head and in the heart both. Not just one. It won't work if you just go with one. So you tell them, you know, if you have to take a shot across a crowded marketplace, might hit a woman or child to kill a terrorist, don't do it. Hunt him down another day and kill him, but don't do it. That's the first do no harm, and you know where I copied that from. From a dead Roman guy, I copied no better friend, no worse enemy. In other words, you're going to be friends with these people. Don't become racist. Don't become haters of everyone over here because there's some terrorists over here. You go ahead and kill them, but don't forget you're there to be the friends. We're there to liberate these people, not triumph over there, that sort of thing. So you get your troops used to running the ethical midfield in American football. And why is that? Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. If you're running the ethical midfield and you make a mistake, you can recover. If you're running the sidelines, always trying to see what you can get away with, and you make a mistake, you're out of bounds. So you keep them inside that, so when they go home, they can look in the mirror and be proud of who they are, young men and women who fought for this country. You don't want them going back ashamed to look in the mirror.
And you said we're not going to allow bad process to stump good people. As you fought the bureaucracy, I was struck in your book, because you were very honest about it, the managing down the chain as you became more senior, but there was also the job of managing up.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be as tricky or as much of a minefield as managing down. How did your leadership style evolve from when you were a young officer to when you became more in charge of Central Command and beyond? Well,
I did learn young that if you take good people and match them with bad processes, the bad processes win about 9 out of 10. So you had to look at the processes, even though your eyes glaze over sometimes. You think, that guy, I got to look at the process for these guys on the ground calling for airplanes overhead. But if you don't do it, it's not going to work. There were more consistencies for me when I commanded as a second lieutenant, 21 years old, 40 sailors and Marines in the infantry in my platoon. And then some 35 years later, when I was a 4-star general commanding 200,000 U.S. soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, Marines, and 50,000 Allied troops. It was more consistent. I could command either one of those in about 10 minutes a day, make a decision, sign an order, or whatever. And then what you had to do was spend the rest of the day coaching. Now, I coached young 18, 19, 20-year-old infantrymen when I was a second lieutenant. That's why they're called infantry, infant soldier, young soldier. When I made 4-star, I'm now coaching admirals and generals from a dozen different countries, but it's still coaching. And so it takes a lot of listening, a lot of being willing to be persuaded. It takes a lot of, a bit of a sense of humor, frankly, especially when you're in a very grim job that involves young men being rolled into body bags because you lost them. You've got to find a way to guard your own spirit and be a shock absorber for those around you. But you also have to make sure that you stay calm because everything's going to go wrong. Remember, you just careen from one crisis to another, generally as a leader, certainly in the ones that some of you all have held. It's just one crisis after another. And you've got to find a way to maintain your balance through that because people are going to need both your competence, but they need empathy. They have to have hope you're going to get through that. And empathy is not some wishy-washy thing. That is critical in a crisis. Think of COVID. We were just hearing before lunch that great talk in here. I took more notes than since I was in undergrad school as those two talked. But when it hits, it's a race between any crisis. It's a race between time and knowledge. For example, with COVID, every hour going by, the doctors, the nurses, the scientists are scrambling. What is it? How's it transmitted? How do we treat it? How do we get a vaccination? they're scrambling on this. They don't have all that information. But at the same time, people are literally dying. And that's what happens in a crisis. And without hope, it can be crushing no matter how competent you are. So you're trying to pull this together. For example, there's a medieval fable that really sums it up. This guy's on the road to London, and he runs into two other travelers, and one's named Fear and one's named Plague. And he walked over and said to Plague, "What are you guys doing? Why are you going to London?" And Plague says, "Oh, we're going to go up there and kill 10,000 people." Traveler looks at it and says, "You can really do that?" And Plague says, "Oh, no, I can only kill 100. Fear is going to kill the rest." You've got to remember that as a leader, that you've got to have empathy for the people you're leading, especially when they're putting their lives on the line. So that was the school I was in, and that's the way I basically guided the same way of leading as a young second lieutenant as when I was a 4-star.
You can see why I have a man crush on him. You also talk about the need for transparency, and I was struck. You said once you made general, you'd never have a bad meal or never hear the truth again.
Yeah.
You had with you. You kept journalists with you in your battles, and you had people around you who you kind of looked to be your own critic. Why was that important?
Well, I kept the journalists around. I allowed them to go anywhere. I'd usually put a corporal or sergeant with them so they didn't walk into a gun or something. You know, it's just one of those things. But I figured that we weren't in the Marine Corps. We were in the U.S. Marine Corps. We answer to you. And if what we're doing can't stand the light of day, we shouldn't be doing it. But I was also that confident of the, basically, I was that confident of the ethics and the capabilities of the troops that I had no reservations about them being revealed like that.
And was that typical of your peers, or was that unique to your? Yeah,
that's the way we were brought up, you know, just be open about it, that sort of thing. I don't think there's anything for us to hide about what we're doing, other than, you know, obviously we don't tell the enemy what we're going to do the next day, but aside from things like that, just be open about it.
Now, we've started to tell the enemy what we're going to do the next day. I think that's migrated a little bit since you left. As you think about the country at large, Abraham Lincoln said that no army could crush us, but we could die by suicide. Given what you've seen around the world and from your perspective, where do you think the United States stands on suicide watch right now?
Stands on?
To Lincoln's comment about we could die by suicide. The state of the country.
You know, I've spent 45 years basically defending the country from foreign enemies. That's been my focus. And I am more concerned today with what Lincoln warned about. I think it was his first published speech as a young man. This is a decade before he's president.
1938.
Yeah, 1838.
1838, yeah. Sorry.
God dang, I was thinking, man, I really lost it on that one. Yeah, but what he said was all the armies of Europe, Africa, and Asia combined with all the money in the world, even under a Bonaparte, couldn't cross the Blue Ridge Mountains and take a gulp of water out of the Ohio River. We're free men and women, we'd stop them. He said, if we're going to die, we're going to die by suicide. And today I'm more concerned with what we're doing here at home than I am with a foreign enemy. Right now, we sit here in Dallas. I'm not worried about the Russian army right now coming up the Rio Grande. I'm not worried about the Chinese Air Force bombing us. I'm very concerned about the scorching rhetoric, the rolling of eyes, the contempt we're showing toward one another. And here, I'll embarrass the president, but I just go back and read what President Bush said on the 9/11 anniversary last year, and what we need to get back to that fundamental friendliness and respect to one another in this country. Because I'll guarantee you right now in Moscow, as we go after each other, Putin's over there. He's cheering every minute of the day. He knows that we're doing to ourselves what he could not do to America. He could not take this country down, but we could take it down. I'm very worried about it.
Now, you've said that we spend a lot of time thinking about and waiting for people for big, grand solutions, but we give up on singles and doubles, small victories to that end. What could we be doing now to get us out of this risky position we're in?
Well, I'm a big believer in education. It concerns me that we've politicized it to the point that Isaac Asimov's comment that some people think democracy means my ignorance is equal to your expertise. And we saw this played out in COVID, where all of a sudden we have politicians talking about what's the best public health thing when there's public health nurses who can tell you exactly what to do. You know, we've got to keep some kind of confidence in our institutions. We've got to regain confidence in them. And if it is, in fact, what you were bringing up this morning in your opening remarks, if it's poor leadership of those institutions, then we need to encourage the best and brightest of our young folks to go into government service. Now, they don't got to go for 43 years, okay? I mean, even I'm still in, you know, psychological counseling after that one, you know? But they should at least come in for a while. A country's like a bank. You know, if you want to get something out, you want to take freedom out, you got to put something into it. And a World War II Marine put it well. He said, the country didn't need to be perfect to be worth fighting for. So we're going to have to go back to some level of commitment, I think, to the greater good, to the common weal, the Commonwealth, and say that's part of coming of age in America. And I think that's where we start. I'm not proposing a military draft for everyone right now. But there's got to be some kind of commitment to something beside yourself. It can be your school district. It can be teaching on a Native American reservation or in the inner city. There's any number of ways to serve this country, Peace Corps, Marine Corps, whatever. But there's got to be some service in there.
So that's a good segue. Do you think that watching the Ukrainians take such devastation in the name of protecting their young democracy and for freedom, do you think that could be a wake-up call for this country?
Well, it darn well should be. They're reminding us what political leadership in the terms of President Zelensky, what personal commitment is, about what kind of society they're fighting for. If this doesn't bring the lesson home to us, then we've got a bigger problem. But I think America, one thing, it hasn't always had it right. We know America was born with a birth defect, slavery imported from the old world. But we have the remarkable ability to get it right. I mean, think during the midst of the Cold War, Martin Luther King Jr. leads an effort that comes up, even though we're facing literally an existential threat externally. Internally, we make the biggest leap on civil rights in 100 years at the exact same time. So keep the faith. We can do this, we can improve, and we can do it in real time, and we can walk and chew gum at the same time. But it takes a willingness to listen. You know, I studied the most boring leader I've ever studied. You always, when you get put into leadership positions, all of a sudden you start reading about leaders because you realize you don't know it all. The most boring leader I ever studied was George Washington. And as a colonial officer in the British Army, as a general leading a constantly defeated Continental Army against the British, as president, you find he always listens, and he doesn't just listen to say, thank you, now I'm going to go do what I was going to do in the first place. He actually listens with a willingness to be persuaded, and he learns. And by listening and learning, he's not being judgmental, he's staying curious. And then he would find a way to help people. And at that point, he would lead. Sometimes he didn't even have to lead. They went on their own because of how well he had listened and learned from them and helped them. They now had the confidence to go off and do things. We've got to get back to that sort of a country where we're willing to listen to each other and remind ourselves, like I had got reminded by my irreverent troops, that not all of our own ideas are always brilliant. Maybe somebody else has a good idea too.
So if you were put back in charge of the region, Eastern Europe, what book would you pull off your shelf to inform what we should be thinking about today as the Russians try to reassemble the former Soviet Union?
I mean, what would I do if I was in Eastern Europe?
Yeah,
and
like
what, in a NATO job?
Yeah, is there, well, all right, is there a, back in your NATO command?
Yeah. Here's the thing, you know, you get the big things right. I'd do everything I could to define the problem You know, Einstein's supposed to be a bright guy. Said if given an hour to save the world, he'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and gaining consensus on that. Then he'd save the world in 5 minutes. I'd make every effort to get everyone I could on track with Putin must not win in Ukraine. It is critical to everyone in this room. It's even more critical to your children. And so we've got to make certain he loses. It's for the good of the world, and then everything else would fall from that. And there's a million things. What you want to do with strategy is align hundreds of little things, partially align it. And so what you do is, when you get done defining that problem that well, hopefully what you've done is shown like the top of a puzzle box. You know how you can look at the top of the puzzle box, and there's what it looked like at the end? And then they dump the pieces all over, and you got to figure out how to put everything together. What you want to do is have the problem so well defined that people in their mind's eye can say, I know what the end state looks like. A free and independent Ukraine and a Russia that's deterred from ever doing this again. And just start there. Okay,
now you've written about this, and you learned from the account of Sweden when it invaded Russia, and you commented in one of your articles that the Russians don't follow traditional norms of warfare. Mm-hmm. How do you engage an enemy understanding, how does that help you inform how you would engage that conflict?
Well, the challenge you face is, and for those of you who've been in combat, you know what I'm driving at, it takes the veneer of civilization off you. If in some way you can expose to people that we're not the perfect guys, we're the good guys, but there is a demarcation line between good and evil in this case. As a matter of fact, I think in recent memory there's not a better example of this. And at that point, you start aligning with like-minded nations. Notice I didn't say all democracies. Let's face it, FDR didn't have a lot in common with Joseph Stalin, but to defeat Hitler, he was willing to make common cause with him. We've got a lot of nations out there that if we say the challenge is Ukraine must be allowed to stay independent, there's a lot of nations that face challenges on their borders that say, I'll sign up for that. And so I'd go in that direction as far as a way forward and just use that as kind of my modus operandi.
Right. And do you think that, how would you handicap today the risk of escalation beyond Ukraine, beyond the borders of Ukraine?
Well, no doubt in Beijing they're watching everything right now. They're watching it very closely. I think what we want to do is again show the unity of the West. And people say, well, you know, in some of the Western capitals, we have pretty, how can I put this, weak executive leadership. And you know, it's across the democracies. But at the same time, Jens Stoltenberg, the former prime minister in Norway, is the Secretary General of NATO. He loves democracy, he loves freedom, he believes in America, and he's just been extended for 18 months. So there's a leader we can rally around and make certain that as we build up NATO, we show that there's an international leader too that can pull nations together. Now look, Sweden and Finland are thinking about joining NATO. Then you've got another brilliant, very experienced leader in the European Commission, the President, Ursula von der Leyen. And she is the one who had she believed the American CIA assessment. So she had been doing work on potential sanctions long before Russia crossed the line of departure. So what you want to do is look towards leadership again. I mean, that's what we're here to talk about, but recognize not all the leadership necessarily is American. And we need those two international leaders to keep NATO and the European Commission drawing people together. And meanwhile, Beijing's got to be calculating that. What happens now when the European Union and NATO are working as a team? And by the way, Americans and the European Union are resolving their economic challenges to get, and they're working them out. And now China has to calculate what happens if all of a sudden there are economic sanctions on them. They're as addicted to their exports as we are to their imports. And then what you do is, in strategy, you always expand the problem, expand the competitive space. Where does 80% of China's energy supply come from? the Middle East. How many Chinese ships can they sustain in the Indian Ocean? Probably zero. You can see the vulnerability they face. There's ways to send messages that temper other countries' aggressive designs.
So speaking of aggressive, if the next 60 to 90 days doesn't go the way Putin wants it to go, do you fear that he would escalate with some sort of a nuclear response or some other scorched earth strategy?
Yeah, I don't know that my forecast is any better than anyone else's. I will tell you that when I came into office as Secretary of Defense, I was briefed that we read his mail. You all know that by now, the way our intelligence services have done such a magnificent job on Ukraine. And they told me they had plans in their war games to escalate, to de-escalate. I said, explain this, I don't understand. And they said they get into a conventional war, they start it, NATO responds, they start losing, or they start losing in some war, and they escalate to a tactical nuclear weapon. That's a huge weapon, just smaller than the larger ones. But it's still huge compared to any conventional explosive. And so I was sitting there on an airplane one night a couple days later, coming back from seeing allies on my first trip over to Korea. And I got back, called in the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and some other folks. I said, I want you to make plans to put a low-yield nuke on every submarine going to sea and come up with a plan that does not involve putting them on the land in Europe. And then I called the Russian ambassador and I told him what I was doing. I had him come down and I said, you tell your boss, this is what's on our subs starting a little while from now. Didn't tell him when, but they're out there now so I can say it. And so the idea was that he thought we'd never fire an intercontinental ballistic missile if he only fired a low yield. So I wanted him to know that we had low yields that were not just bombs where the plane has to fly over the target, and we could respond in kind. He knows that right now. We'll see if the deterrent only works if they believe we'll use it. And now it comes down to leadership again. Everything always does. So it's whether or not the leadership is seen as willing to use that weapon if he goes there. I don't think he'll use his if he's confident that we would respond in kind.
Are we sharing too much information about what we will do and what we won't do?
You know, there's it's Henry Kissinger. I used to go fly, I'd call him up and I'd say, Dr. Kissinger, I got this problem. This is when I was a 4-star. Sometimes presidents make problems for you. And I'd call him, I'd say, Dr. Kissinger, I got this problem. And there'd be silence, and then I hear that voice from God, you know. He said, General, fly immediately to New York City. I've cleared my schedule, so I hop my plane, fly up, go downtown. And we'd talk, and he'd completely reframe the problem for me, and I'd fly back. But I remember one time I was in there, and he said, Jim, don't ever tell the enemy what you won't do. Even if they're not going to do it, you don't need to reassure them. Don't tell them that. Let them worry about it, and just don't tell them that. Now, after the American surrender in Afghanistan, it was probably necessary for President Biden to tell President Putin that we would not send the U.S. military into Ukraine. And perhaps it had to be said once. I don't think it had to be repeated 10 times. I think we're at a point where he needs to start worrying about what he's unleashed, Putin does. And so I think you've got to be very careful whenever you reassure an adversary you're not going to do something. It's just not my style.
Okay. Broadening the issue about our readiness, you mentioned our deterrence. Do you feel like we're spending our money, our defense money, in the right place to fight the battles that are coming with the technology that's coming?
Well, as you're seeing, you know, a lot of people forecasted big cyber wars going on. They've not happened yet. You've got to be careful about taking your view of the future, what we call the foreseeable future. We have to remember the foreseeable future is not. So what you want to do is get it not 100% wrong. You're never going to get it 100% right. I think a lot of the money we're spending in R&D, research and development, is being spent in the right place. But this latest budget that's been released with the, that has a calculation of inflation at 2.3%, is so obviously short that it's hard to say that we have a serious budget right now for national defense.
Okay, we have just a couple minutes left, and I could go on all day, but I can't. So I want to do a little lightning round with you. Quick answers.
We'll see.
Do you think Putin will be in charge, leading Russia in 5 years, 5 years from now?
Foreseeable future is not foreseeable.
Okay. Do you think China will move against Taiwan within 5 years?
I think we can deter it.
Okay. If democracy were a stock, would you be long or short?
I would put all my money on democracy.
Good for you. You have 7,000 books in your library, I've read?
Used to.
Used to.
I've given away most.
Okay, all right. What book are you reading right now?
Right now I'm reading The Obstacle is the Way. It's by a Texan, Ryan Holiday, from down here in Texas. Great book. Short book, good book.
If you were not a Marine, what career do you think you would have had?
Teacher.
Okay. What keeps you up at night?
Nothing.
Do you own a television?
I what?
Do you own a television?
No, I do not.
So I can't ask you what you're binge watching on Netflix. What is the first word you start Wordle with in the morning? Do you know what Wordle is?
I don't.
Good for
Wordle.
you. Good for you.
I'm a Marine. Any multi-syllable word
All right.
me, you know. So.
And you've never been married, but I understand that you might be. Are you going to miss the casseroles? Okay. All right. The last question I have is, if I write you in on the ballot in 2024, should I write James or Jim?
Jim.
Thank you. All right. The man I have to my left is a national treasure. I want to thank Boeing for sponsoring this conversation.
Yeah.
And it is amazing. I could write
can
his
I
quotes
say
all
one
day.
last?
You can say whatever you want. This is your floor.
I want to share one story with you all. I never get tired of sharing this, and a couple of you will have heard it before. You have, Ken. But I'm a two-star general out in western Iraq. It's 2004. Normal temperature during the day is up around 122 with humidity around 90%. And it's a terrible time. We're losing troops, fighting hard. And I got 29 sailors and Marines who moved me all over the battlefield in 4 vehicles, you know, gunners, drivers, aide-de-camp, communicators. And I'm going out to check the screen line along the Syrian border. And this is these little outposts of a lieutenant and 40 Marines out there on little hilltops just spread out maybe a dozen kilometers between each one. Their job is to stop the foreign fighters from coming in from Syria, out of the Bekaa Valley and out of Syria. And if they get through the screen line, they get to Baghdad, there's going to be dead Americans and a lot of dead innocent Iraqis there if they get through. So we have trouble every day. Of those 29 sailors and Marines, 17 of them would be killed or wounded around me in a matter of 4 months. And I'm a general, I'm not in the tough fighting. So it was a tough time. And we get there about midnight, and we pull inside, and these Marines are living on a little hilltop in the middle of the desert, and you know, living in holes with tarps over their holes and all, going on patrols at night. And the sun comes up, and the lieutenant comes over to brief me. And he's showing me where he's fighting an enemy and how he's staying connected to the other outposts and all. And he's probably about 18 months out of being an undergraduate. And he said, by the way, we caught a guy laying an IED on the road last night you came in on. Well, that's kind of personal, you know. And I said, really? He said, yeah, he spent 2.5 years, he's an engineer, spent 2.5 years in London, speaks perfectly good English. You want to talk to him? I said, sure, send him over. So Lieutenant got done briefing me, and pretty soon he leaves, and the Marine comes back across the rifle on the back of a guy whose hands are cuffed together in little plastic cuffs. He sits down in the dirt next to me, and obviously it hadn't been a good night for him. You know, he's out there digging a hole, he's got 2 artillery rounds, and he looks up and there's 5 guys with automatic weapons pointed at him. And he knows his 401k is in deep trouble at this point, you know. So I could tell he was Sunni, and I said, what are you doing this for? We're the Marines, you're Sunni, we're the only friends you've got in this frickin' country. Why are you doing this? And he said, oh, you Jews, you Americans, you're here to steal the oil. And I said, no, frankly, I'm not. I pull my wallet out every time I pump gas in my car. But you're an educated man, you're going to talk like that. I don't have time for this. You just go away. The Marine stepped forward to take him away. He says, can I sit here for a minute, General? I said, okay. And he's sitting there and he said, well, I just don't like having foreign troops in my country. Man to man, I respect that. I wouldn't want them in my country. I said, okay. So we talked some more about his time in London, asked about his family. They'd been forced out of Baghdad in the Civil War. His wife and 2 daughters were living about 10 kilometers away down on the river. And so, you know, son's getting up there at this point, and he asked if he's going to jail. And I said, oh, yeah. You're going to be wearing an orange jumpsuit for a good long time in Abu Ghraib. You're lucky you're not dead for this little stunt. And so he says, can I ask you one last question? I said, sure. He said, do you think, General, if I'm a model prisoner, my family and I could immigrate to America? Think about that. He was so full of hatred, he was literally trying to kill us. And as proud as I am of my sailors and Marines and America's power of intimidation that we need in this imperfect world, that we will fight, like Abraham Lincoln said we would if we're attacked. The power of America's inspiration at a time when we may be doubting our own country, he didn't doubt it. He would give anything right now to be sitting in Dallas, Texas, with his 2 daughters going to school out here. And on your worst day, when your beloved country has upset you and caused you to wonder, you remember that I got taught a lesson from an enemy in a very difficult time. Remind me, don't ever doubt America. Don't ever bet against America. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, hold on just a second. Hold on just a second.
Thank you.
You have a big fan in the front.